Amendment rights of the Manchester Music Festival, and I'll be brief. The very first sentence of the very first amendment to the United States Constitution is that no law shall be made respecting an establishment of religion. That doesn't mean an established church. That means respecting an establishment of religion, be it any religion. Our country was founded to escape Christian nationalism and not reincorporate it. City Hall may not be weaponized by tax-exempt religious organizations to unconstitutionally, I'm sorry, I have a very bad anxiety problem. Yeah, I have an anxiety problem, yeah. So, City Hall may not be weaponized by tax-exempt religious organizations to unconstitutionally force a creation of a shadow government to enact some sort of utopian 18th century religious kingdom. The right to express yourself religiously in the Constitution is absolute, but forcing those views and opinions on the general public, many of whom differ in religious views, is not expression of religion, but rather religious oppression, akin to what the Taliban does in the Middle East. If song lyrics were insightful and offensive and also literal, they could be used as evidence in criminal trials. Many of the most famous artists in history would be in serious trouble. Bob Marley sings I Shot the Sheriff. The Talking Heads' biggest hit is Psycho Killer. The opening lines to Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody are Mama, I Just Killed a Man. Fortunately for these artists, the artistic expression is protected as free speech under the First Amendment. Freddie Mercury did not confess to just having killed a man by putting a gun against his head and pulling the trigger. Bob Marley did not confess to having shot a sheriff, and Johnny Cash did not confess to shooting a man in Reno just to watch him die. And let's talk about rap music, for instance, which is how I built the foundation of my successful music company who just performed at the Manchester Music Festival with zero vulgarity. A federal district court judge declared the record obscene in Skywalker Records v. Navarro in 1990, applying the Miller test from the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Miller v. California, which happened in 1973. The 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that case in 1992. The court stated that the hip-hop album was an expression of self and contained serious artistic value. In fact, in just this year, in 2022, Congress introduced the Restoring Artistic Protection Act, aka the RAP Act, citing that prosecutors in over 500 criminal cases have used artist lyrics as evidence against defense in violation of First Amendment protected activity. To limit the types of the Manchester Music Festival's music and lyrics arguably violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. As a Kentucky Supreme Court squarely held in Montgomery v. Montgomery in 2001, and as stated in KRS 391-170, the interest in music is a protected property right. The Kentucky Supreme Court is also held in Montgomery, and the United States Supreme Court held in Ward against Rock v. Racism, which is a case from 1989 setting 30 or more years of precedent. Music, as a form of expression and communication, is protected under the First Amendment. Likewise, it is protected. Motion pictures, programs, broadcast by radio, television, live entertainment, such as musical and dramatic works, all fall within the First Amendment guarantee. Therefore, there is little difficulty here in concluding that the Manchester Music Festival in question is protected free speech under the United States and Kentucky constitutions. Noise ordinances that restrict the First Amendment rights are also subject to constitutional scrutiny per Ward v. Rock against Racism. The United States Supreme Court held that the First Amendment applies to not only speech, but other forms of expression, including amplified music. Our Supreme Court in Kentucky explained that the limitations on the government's attempt to restrict First Amendment rights, the requirement of narrow tailoring is satisfied so long as the regulation promotes a substantial government interest that would be achieved less effectively absent the regulation. To be sure, this standard does not mean that a time, place, or manner of regulation may burden substantially more speech than necessary to further the government's legitimate interests. The government may not regulate expression in such a manner that a substantial portion of the burden on speech does not serve to advance its goals. What the evangelicals here, who I respect, are asking for is both broad and overly vague, and already has been constitutionally tested. Overbreadth and void for vagueness. In Wilfong v. Commonwealth in 2004 in Kentucky, both doctrines were explained. Although vagueness and overbreadth doctrines are related, they are distinct and have significant differences. The vagueness doctrine is rooted in due process principles, 14th Amendment, and is directed toward ensuring fair notice and clarity and precision of penal provisions, whereas the overbreadth doctrine focuses on statute's potential impact on the exercise of a fundamental right. For instance, a provision is too vague if it fails to give fair notice of what it prohibits. An imperfectly clear statute may be unconstitutionally overbroad if it unduly infringes upon a fundamental First Amendment right. To be consistent with the constitutional doctrine when considering ordinances that broadly prohibit amplified sound, courts have focused on the specificity of the time, place, and volume and levels restricted. In Tanner v. Virginia City Beach in 2009, the court held that the noise ordinance that prohibited unreasonably loud, disturbing, and unnecessary noise of such character, intensity, and duration as to be detrimental to the life or health of persons of reasonable sensitivity, or noise that disturbs or annoys the quiet, comfort, or repose of reasonable persons, was unconstitutionally vague because it failed to sufficiently describe the noise prohibited. The court reasoned that the noise that one person may consider loud, disturbing, and unnecessary may not disturb the sensibilities of another. As employed in this context, such adjectives are inherently vague because they require persons of average intelligence to guess at the meaning of those words, and that was decided in Thielen and also Lutz v. City of Indianapolis in 2005. The references to ordinance to reasonable persons and persons of reasonable sensitivity do not provide a degree of definiteness sufficient to save the ordinance from present vagueness challenge. Such terms, considered in their context, delegate to an already overworked and underappreciated police officer force, thank you guys, to determine whether persons of whom the police officer considers to be of reasonable sensitivity would find the noise detrimental to their life or health. Likewise, these terms leave to a police officer the determination to whether the persons a police officer considers to be reasonable would be disturbed or annoyed in the comfort of their repose by particular noise at that time. Determinations of this nature invite arbitrary enforcement. Police officers likely will have differing perceptions regarding what levels of sound exceed the tolerance levels and sensitivities of reasonable people. Because these determinations are required by the ordinance, they can only be made by police officers on a subjective, meaning an opinionative basis. Courts have routinely held that the language of those ordinances are impermissibly vague. Y'all follow me so far? Likewise, in Daly versus City of Sarasota, the court held that an ordinance prohibiting all amplified sound emanating from an incompletely enclosed structure, such as a patio at Pat's, which has its roof open, within a commercial business, violated the First Amendment when applied during certain hours of each day, regardless of the volume of the sound. Its reasoning was premised on the doctrine of overbreadth and the potential to suppress First Amendment rights. In Duffy versus the City of Mobile, Alabama in 1977, an ordinance prohibited all amplified sound plainly audible at a distance greater than 50 feet anywhere in the city any time of the day or night, and held that this sweeping restriction of sound is not only narrowly drawn, it restricts speech beyond the point necessary to accomplish the objective of the government for which the ordinance was created. However, we're also here to talk scripture, and if we want to talk scripture and music, we can do that too. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 6, they stated that the women danced in the streets and played instruments to celebrate the slaughter of the Philistines. They stated that vulgarity, which I was at the music festival every night, was present, but I guess genocide gets a pass. Jeremiah chapter 10 bans the use of Christmas trees that were originally used by the Druids of Celtic Ireland, but we don't see the evangelicals protesting that downtown. In fact, we see them in their own pagan symbols in their churches and homes and in their Facebook photos and Instagram pictures. But the operators of similar music festivals want to cherry pick the Bible for their agenda, so let's do that. 2 Kings verse chapter 3:15 specifically says, "But now bring me a musician." Then it happened, the musician played, and the hand of the Lord came upon him. And I'm announcing my very intent to sue each and every person and each and every individual entity who interferes with the Manchester Music Festival to alter any speech or limit any genre of music or any other constitutional protected activity in federal or state court. And you can laugh if you want to, but I'm currently undefeated in federal court on civil rights violations, and my state record closely matches my federal record. And Jenna can check that if she wants to. We the people do not sit idly by and let a conglomerate of religious organizations turn our city into a new Jonestown for all of us to drink the Kool-Aid and create their own theocracy, ruling in the name of the very God they routinely blaspheme and disobey. The Manchester Music Festival is both constitutionally protected and beneficial to our economy. Do we want to sit in the same area day after day, reliving the glory days of our past while towns 3 hours away with a similar geographic setup generated $2.6 billion in tourism revenue from breweries and music 2021 in Nashville? Or do we want to keep seeing our children leave, never to return? Because it's time to change that mural on the wall from the clay that we were into the clay that we are. And I yield my time. Thank you.